Shalom all, and we've come to the end of our first book of the Bible's daily studies, Genesis to Revelations 2018. We are on chapters 49 and 50, and then I shall give a summary of things we should have learned from it.
In today's account, we're going to cover Jacob's blessing his sons, his death and burial, and Joseph's death. Simply the ending of the beginning, Genesis being the beginning, first book of the Bible. Now that the history of how the nation of Israel was formed from one man Abraham, his larger family, and that family increasing to a number the size of a nation chosen by God, the rest of the Bible will be about them. Not other nations, Christians, especially not Christians, nor other denominations. That includes not about any other history or future plans of any other nations or such people, except those relating to this nation, Israel, as the peculiar people of God. And Israel is made up of many different individuals from different nations.
Going straight into it, So this book of Genesis was really the creation of the world, but also the creation of Israel, the nation. We have to grasp who were these people that were created, because from now on, the Bible will be about these people, all the way through the New Testament and all the way to the book of Revelations. Get their formation wrong, who they are, what they are supposed to do and achieve, and what they were given to do and achieve, and your whole understanding will be wrong of the Bible. Your whole life will be wrong. You'll be striving for something and not knowing what you're striving for, and doing practices that you do not know from where these practices came, and they may not have been from God or from the Bible. Okay, here we go. Genesis chapters 49 verse 4. Jacob calling his sons together and performing some blessings or predictions on their lives. It reads, "Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch." He was speaking about Reuben, his firstborn. And my comment on this is, some errors have lasting consequences that may affect our offspring's destiny. Reuben's action did this he did in Genesis chapter 35 verse 22. And such action will have a consequence in 1 Chronicles chapters 5 verse 1. But it also highlights something I've been highlighting as we go through Genesis, that these laws existed before the creation of Israel. We see this in Deuteronomy chapters 27 verses 20 about someone lying with their father's wives. On to verse 5, Simeon. Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into thy secret, unto their assembly. My honour be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Verse 7, Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. This is what they did in Genesis 34 verse 25, when Simeon and Levi went and killed Shechem and their families, their household, for raping Dinah initially, but then Shechem wanted to marry her. And the future consequences of this is Joshua chapters 19 verse 1, 21 verses 5 to 7, 1 Chronicles chapters 4 verse 24 and 39. We then move on to Genesis 49 verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So unto the descendants of this person shall the gathering of the people be. We shall see that is to do with the Messiah later on. This is said to relate to many prophecies relating to the Messiah, one of which is Isaiah chapter 11 verse 10 and Luke chapter 2 verses 30 to 32. Okay, we reach the end of his prophecies, then come John down to verse 49-28 of Genesis. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is it that their father spake unto them, and blessed them. Everyone according to his blessing he blessed them. The words that Jacob said over these sons will become the part of the future events of the 12 family heads as we read the Bible. Verse 29, and he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people, bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. Verse 31, there they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife, and there I buried Leah. And then 50 verse 25, and Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So what we have here is Jacob asking that he be buried with all the other patriarchs. And Joseph, when he died in chapter 50, says, also take my body out of Egypt, back to the promised land where all our patriarchs are. And that is what happened. All the patriarchs, anyone that went in, Jacob and Joseph, came out of Egypt. None was left in there. And maybe that is why there's this fight for this land of Egypt today. They want the land which all the patriarchs were buried, whether it's the Muslims or the Jews. So we can see the importance of this land, even to be the ones who were dying, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, they wanted to be buried in this land. Okay, Genesis chapter 50, I'm going to start at verse 3, which is Israel's death. They are taking him back to Canaan. Joseph asks Pharaoh, can we have permission to go? And Pharaoh gives him permission to go. And it reads in verse 3, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days, 70 days. Verse 7, and Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. Verse 9, and it was a very great company. Verse 11, and when the inhabitants of the land of Canaanite saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians. Now some groups, religious groups, who want to promote that the original Israelites were black, will use this sentence as one of their evidence. They say that the ancient Egyptians were black. These Israelites going back to bury Jacob were seen as Egyptians, so therefore they were also black. From the extracts above, it should be obvious that they thought to be black because the composition of the great burial company had many, if not mostly, Egyptians in it, by birth and by attire, by the way they dressed. It does not conclude, we cannot conclude that Joseph nor his brethren being of any specific colour. They were being judged according to their dress and the big company that was being following all the chariots and so on. Remember, Joseph himself was dressed as an Egyptian in his Egyptian ruling attire. And later on we shall see that the same assumption was made of Moses when he killed somebody and fled Egypt, and he met a lady, his future wife, at the well. In Exodus chapter 2 verse 19, it was because of his dress, not his colour. I then jump to verse 18 of Genesis chapter 50, where it says, and his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we be thy servants. So when their father died, they thought that Joseph will take vengeance on them, and they pleaded to him to forgive them and so forth. And Joseph did. He actually said it's God who did it and made it all work for good and not for bad. But anyway, this is just another example of them bowing down to him, as he predicted in his dreams at age 17. So that concludes Genesis. So some things that we should have learned. which is important that we do learn these things when they are given to us, otherwise we have a wrong understanding on which to base all the verses that we'll then read in the future. Wrong understanding leads to wrong belief, leads to wrong actions, leads to not getting the salvation that you may be striving for. Which is why some will say, Lord, Lord, did we not do the right things? And Yeshua will say, actually, no, you did iniquity. I never knew you. You had the wrong understanding. So what have we seen? We have seen the creation of the world and mankind, separation of people in Noah and Abraham, principles of God punishing disobedience and rewarding obedience, genealogy of God's people to the formation of his nation Israel, from one man, Abraham, to a larger family of Jacob's household, which he got from Laban, and included mostly servants. Before that family multiplied to become a household that went into Egypt, and that came out, or we see them coming out as a nation, Israel, in Exodus. Point number 1. The word day is used in two contexts, to either mean the daylight part of the whole 24-hour period, or the whole 24-hour period. We see this in Genesis chapters 1 verse 5. It's important we get this differentiation, because in John 11:9, Yeshua answered and said, are they not 12 hours in a day? So clearly the word day is used in two contexts. We should also note that the day starts with the evening, which is sunset, not midnight. This basic understanding is necessary to understand New Testament usages of on the first day of the week, for example, i.e. sunset, our Saturday night, not midnight or not Sunday that we think it is. Our Messiah being in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. You need to know when did the 3 days start, and especially when did it finish. Did it finish at sunset Saturday night, or did it finish at Sunday morning? Also, when we come to prophecies, like in the book of Daniel, talks about until 2,300 days. It says in some Bibles, and other places it says until 2,300 evening and mornings. Are they talking about 24-hour periods, or are they talking about parts of those periods? All of this comes from a basic understanding of the use of the word day. There is a denomination who have got that totally wrong, and have come up with some 1844-43 theory based on the wrong understanding of the word day as applied to Daniel chapters 8:14. Point number 2. Appointed or worship times of God were set as part of God's created environment for man, before he made man and put man in it. In other words, God created an environment, then put man in it. And that environment consisted of specific appointed times to come before God. We saw in 24 verse 63, where Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the evening tide. And this is why this time. It wasn't just an arbitrary time. The King James's version of Genesis 3 verse 8 also says, and they heard the voice of Yahweh walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Could this be the evening time when he came to have communion with them? But found that they were hiding. So, these appointed times, we get it from Genesis 1:14. The word translated in the King James's and possibly some other Bibles as seasons is actually appointed times, and we see that same word in other places translated as appointed times. In Leviticus 23 verse 2, it is translated as the feast of God. These times are marked by the sun and the moon. For more explanation, go back to where I spoke of some of the early teachings, the early days writings on those chapters. We saw periods of 7 days for a week, 30 for a month, and is why we see the mention of 7 and 30 days in the Bible, and we'll see those days mentioned as we go through all the readings. For example, the mourning of Aaron and Moses was 30-day periods. You can check this in Numbers 20 verse 29 and Deuteronomy 34 verse 8. We also saw God had established a year with Noah in Genesis chapters 8:13. Third point, the word Adam was, or at least could be, the Hebrew word for mankind, not necessarily an individual. We saw this in Genesis chapters 5 verse 2. Fourth point, the living human body is the soul, Genesis 2:7. And Yahweh God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul, Genesis 12:5. And Abram took Sarah his wife and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. So the soul is a human body. Point number 5. The word for woman, which is a Hebrew word numerical value H802, translated as woman, and wife, same Hebrew word, but the English has given it two separate words. Point number 6. God's law, or at least many elements of it, existed before passed on through Moses to the nation of Israel, indicating he was the same and had the same criteria before the formation of Israel, the nation. We had examples as first fruits offerings, Cain and Abel, murder, adultery, sacrifice requirements, and practice as not dividing the birds when Abraham came to make a sacrifice. He divided all the animals, but he didn't divide the birds. We saw it in Genesis chapters 15 verse 10, and we shall see it in Leviticus chapters 1 verse 17. There was clean and unclean animals of Noah, and we'll also see this in Leviticus chapters 11. Firstborn getting double portion and the birthright. More specifically, we are told in Genesis 26 verse 5, all of this was, when I say all of this, I mean why Israel, or Abraham's descendants, was chosen. Genesis 26 verse 5 says, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, and my statutes and my laws. So we know that these things existed in the old, before it was given to Moses. And it's because of Abraham which led to why Israel, the nation, was favoured or chosen by God and taken out of Egypt. Not for anything they had done, but because of God's promise to Abraham. And then he gave them, we will see that he's going to give them the same things that Abraham already had. Point number 7. God had a way of living and killed all except Noah and his family for sinning against that way. 6 verse 12 says, and God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. His way was a righteous way. Genesis chapter 7 verse 1. And Yahweh said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in his generation. Point number 8, God had a yearly cycle. We see this in Genesis 8:13. Its first day and month, which later we see, or we shall see, is not the 1st of January. Point number 9. Abraham and his children were called Hebrews, as Paul in the New Testament is. We see this in Genesis 14:13, 39:14, and 2 Chronicles 11:22, and Philippians chapters 3 verse 5. Abraham was born a Syrian and moved to other countries, so being a Hebrew is not of a birthplace, or as you would be called a Syrian, nor of where you live, because he moved around different places and he never changed his name. There are 4, in other words, when you come to England, you may be called English. When you go to another country, you may call American. There are 4 places where God refers to the people as Hebrew. This is in Exodus chapters 21 verse 2, Deuteronomy 15 verse 12, Jeremiah 34 verse 9, and Jeremiah 34 verse 14. But there is no indication in those usage that he is only referring to a certain part of the congregation of Israel which came out of Egypt. In other words, the descendants of those coming out of Egypt, he didn't separate them and said, well, those on the left are Hebrew and those on the right are not Hebrew. His words were always to the whole group, which consisted of persons from many heritage, i.e. through intermarriages or servants and so forth. Later we shall see he had one law for everybody in the congregation. For example, in Exodus chapters 12:49. Not only were they of various heritage, but also of various colours, obviously. The only difference we can see from the Bible is between the Hebrew and others is in language. In Luke chapters 23:38 it says, and the inscription was also written over him, talking about Messiah, in letters of Greek, Latin and Hebrew. However, I doubt Abraham, nor the others, became a Hebrew through learning a different language than that of which he was born with as a Syrian. Point number 10. Receiving blessings and promises of God were conditional on obedience. They were indicators as the condition if, which God said. For example, in chapters 4 verse 7, chapters 18 verse 26. Also wording as Genesis 17:1, which reads, and when Abraham was 90 years old and 9, Yahweh appeared to Abraham and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me, and be thou perfect, and I will. So the condition of God doing, and I will, was a condition that Abraham walk before him and be perfect. Point 11. A Hebrew's household incorporated their Gentile servants and in-laws. Point number 12. Remember Abraham took all his wherever he went, and Isaac took all the people where he went, and Jacob did the same. Point 12. Faith in God's unseen promise and obedience to his laws is required. You see this in Genesis 15:6, 26:5, and as it's stated in Revelations 12:17, 14:12, and 22:14 Revelations. And we also see that in the New Testament it said that Abraham obeyed God and accounted for him for righteousness. And it talks about the faith. In Hebrews 11 it talks about the faith of people. And all of these people had the commandments of God and the faith, not just one. And Romans 11 also talks about those who will be cut off by the unbelief. In other words, they didn't have the faith in Messiah, although they had the commandments of God. Point number 13. Circumcision is a covenant, a sign, Genesis 17:10, not a law. We shall later see if it is repeated as a law. I don't think we shall. We shall see in Leviticus chapters 12, it is part of the cleansing of a woman's after childbirth, but it's not stated as a law in itself. If it is not stated as a law, then that explains why Paul's epistles and teachings were generally about combating the Judaizers' concept that Gentiles had to be circumcised. They called it a law or thought it was a law, but Paul realized it was a covenant sign, not a law. Point 14. God can take the form of a human. We saw this in chapters 18 verses 2, 33 and 19:1 when he came to Abraham as 3 humans. 2 of the angels went off to Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, and 1 stayed talking with Abraham. We know that one to be Yahweh God, where he said, no, if I got 10 people, righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, would you still destroy the place? Point number 15, no priest, no church service or any service, payment, celebration or record was made or necessary for marriages. It was, as it says, going in onto her. Point 16, there were false religious systems of i.e. Laban, who had idol god worshipping, idols to worship, and Egypt, who had priests and sacrifices. And we shall later see this in the New Testament, where Paul is taught to be the priest of Jupiter, and so on, and Mercury. Paul and Barnabas. Point 17. To interpret is not to translate from one language or sound to another, as they do with the speaking tongues today. All hearers can understand the language, but one person, for example Joseph, can both understand the language and know the meaning. We saw this in Genesis chapters 41 verse 15 and in 1 Chronicles 14:13, where Paul says, "Wherefore let him that speaketh in an unknown tongue pray that he may interpret." The same person does both things. Point 18. God and Satan's religions, false religions, etc., changed names of their people and did not mix. Point 19. We noted, or should have noted, they were intermarriages between Jacob and the maids of Laban's, as well as between Judah and others, with Canaanite and other women. Also, when Simeon and Levi captured the women of Shechem, they became incorporated into the household. In other words, Jacob went to the east nation as one man and came back with most of the future Israel. They then joined with Joseph's offsprings, born of an Egyptian woman, to complete the formation. What we can learn about the various origins of the individuals who will go on to make up Israel is that God does not care about our origins. As the creator of mankind, he calls all from all walks of life, nationalities, tongues and nations to follow him, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, in obedience. If we do that, which is not transgression or breaking his laws, as Abraham didn't do and Isaac and Jacob, we will get the same promised reward. Now some persons may argue Leah and Rachel were blood related to Jacob because Laban was Abraham's nephew. They base this on the word son of Nahor in Genesis chapters 29 verse 5. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban the son of Nahor? However, the Chaldean word translated as son does not necessarily mean direct son, but lineage, as confirmed in Genesis 28 verse 5, which says, And Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to Padan-aram unto Laban the son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. And we shall see in terms of David, when it says son of David or whatever, it's not literally the son of David. I think all this searching for scriptures to confirm the colour of Israel, as some people do, to make them the whole nation as one colour, is futile, divisive, and of the enemy, not of God. A colour of a person is denoted by that of both parents. From the outset, we are not told the mother of Noah, nor the colour of his wife, nor of his sons' wives, to get an indication of their colour, or his son's colour. And for those who want to start the process from Esau and Jacob's birth, we were told by Josephus the only difference between those two sons, was Esau being hairy, and the red colour was of his hairs, not his skin. In any case, since their birth, they and their offspring went on to intermarry, collect servants, etc., to make up the compositions of their households from various heritages. To understand the rest of the Bible, when it uses the word Israel, or the congregation of Israel, etc., and then goes on to prophesy about this group and their Messiah, it is essential we visualize the various heritage who made up this group. Because if we do not, we'll come out with false theologies and be snared into following false groups who may snare you by a bit of truth, but a lot of error. Shalom, and hope to continue our studies tomorrow with Exodus.